bloom until the summertime. So if we saw it today, it would just look like leaves. It wouldn't have flowers. But at different intervals, there will be different things blooming. With the radish, with mustard, and also with another plant that we see a lot of are garland daisies, chrysanthemums, that are really brilliant right now. They're absolutely brilliant yellow daisy-like flowers. But in a month, those will all be brown and dead. So if we can get those to be less and get the natives to be more, it will be more pretty year-round, and that's part of our goal. The plant that we have here is called Caterpillar Phacelia, and it's you saw the baby blue eyes earlier. This is a plant in the same plant family, and it grows in big clouds of purple, and this has been a tremendous year for this plant. You'll find it also in Portuguese. If you go down to the end of Crenshaw and hike down the fire road there are tons of these that right now that just look beautiful and lush and this really pretty soft purple color. The form of the flower is very similar to what we saw with the fiddleneck a few minutes ago, but it is not, it's not the same at all, and it's a bigger, much larger wildflower. And it's hard to see for the mustard here, but it's really a neat plant, and you can see how many of them. These are getting a little bit, the flowers will progressively bloom on the top here.
And it's called what?
Caterpillar Phacelia, Phacelia.
Are the mustards edible?
Yeah, they're edible. When they get really dried out at the end of the season, or well, not so far from now, I'm misspeaking. I mean, about a month from now, 2 months, all these flowers will have turned into, once they are pollinated, they turn into big, long fruits, basically, that have tons of little tiny seeds in them. And you can go like this with the stalk and see all the mustard seeds, and you can eat the seeds and as well as eat the leaves if you want. I mean, we never advocate eating anything on the trail without knowing 100% what it is. And, especially with regard to the native plants, it's incredibly important to not cut them, take them with you, etc. Just observe and enjoy. But the mustards are really quite good. I would sample one, but these are getting kind of old. Early in the season when the leaves are really bright green, they have a taste that's a lot like wasabi, and they're really good. So you have to come with us earlier in the season to experience that. Now we're standing right in the middle of the area that was restored just a few years ago, and as you can see, these trees are really tall considering the fact that they were only planted a few years ago. Above us is a black walnut, and if you look closely on the ground you can see the walnut shells. Most of the walnuts are, they're last year's walnut crop, and animals have already come and eaten those really rich energy sources of the nut inside the seed. But it's a beautiful tree that loses its leaves in the fall, but come spring is back in its glory. And the longer we go into the summer, the more shady this area will become. It's also an interesting area because it is part of the riparian or water-filled area that we talked about a little bit earlier. And there are a number of what we call understory plants that like this environment. And we talked a little bit about the stinging nettle being something to avoid. Behind us, as you can see kind of on that little island right there, is a plant with what look like really ragged leaves with jagged edges. Those jagged edges have a little tiny spot of formic acid on them, and if it hits your skin, you will know it. So you want to stay away from that plant. We also, accompanying that plant often in the riparian zone, is another plant that's not as dangerous, and it's commonly held to be the antidote to the stinging, and it's this plant right here. It's called mugwort. That's its common name. It is also called wormwood, And it's a relative of the California sagebrush that we talked about earlier. It also has that kind of, it's not the same smell, but like the coyote or cowboy cologne, it's got that same scent to it, kind of that nice, fresh, minty smell. And behind us in this nice walnut tree, you'll see a box with a hole in it. And unfortunately, some bees have moved in. But this box is an owl box. It's a barn owl box, and it was put here as an Eagle Scout project last year. The South Bay Wildlife Rehab organization, is anybody familiar with them? They're a nonprofit group that rehabilitates birds that have been injured, including birds of prey, owls, etc. They had about 4 barn owls that were orphaned, and they raised them all through the summer last year, and those orphaned barn owls were released into the wild last December in Chandler, and we're hoping that they've stayed. We don't know for sure. We'd hoped that they'd started to populate these barn owl boxes that the Eagle Scout worked so hard to put up. But as you can see, this one we're going to have vector control come out and take out the beehive. But this area is really a nice little glimpse into what it's like underneath the trees in a wetlands area. If it had been raining recently, this area would be rushing down with water. And once again, one of the key benefits to having a native plant grouping in these watersheds is that it cleans the water. All of these plants have an effect of purifying the water so that downstream it's not polluted, and that's a huge environmental benefit. Trail? And here's an example of the mugwort right next to the stinging nettle.
Okay, the stinging nettle.
She doesn't touch the stinging nettle.
I'm not going to touch the stinging nettle. It is an area that is being actively restored. As you can see, there's lots of mulch on the ground. That is intended to keep down the weed seeds. And the Conservancy is experimenting with a lot of different techniques in terms of restoring different areas. One of them is to use a polymer that retains water, and it is kind of like a powder form when it's used initially, and it's put into the soil. When it gets wet, it swells up, and the roots of the plants can, in the capillary action that sucks out moisture from the soil, can tap into this polymer that's retaining some moisture and use that moisture. So that's one technique that's being tried that's brand new. But in the midst of all of this, we talked a little bit about the ways that weeds have been controlled, in addition to just yanking them and doing a lot of hard work. During the off season, trying to get the weed seeds to come up with a slight bit of water and then killing them is another technique. And every place you see a little flag behind me is the location of a plant. So all of these are to, whenever you are hiking anywhere and you see the little flags, that just is a sign to kind of tread softly and avoid that area, so not to trample the restoration. Behind on the hill, can you see the plant that has kind of whitish spikes of flowers? That is astragalus, and that is the food plant of the PV blue butterfly. And it is being reintroduced on a number of locations throughout the area. It's being grown and cultivated by the Conservancy, as well as all the other plants you see here are cultivated at the Defense Fuel Support Depot, where we have a nursery. And we gather seed stock from the natural areas on the peninsula, sort through those seeds, clean them, and then they can grow new plants for reintroduction later. And those plants are being used in every one of our preserves. So the astragalus is a key part of that, because it's felt that one of the key reasons that the PV blue became thought to be actually extinct until 1994 was that there were so few plants of astragalus on the peninsula. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, people didn't realize that there was a nice, healthy population of plants in the Defense Fuel Support Depot. And they could also find the butterflies feeding on deerweed, which is a related plant that was found at the Defense Fuel Support Point. Now that area is being restored too, so it increases the number of plants that can be used to reintroduce species like the PV blue. And in fact, Friendship Park, if you're familiar with that, in San Pedro, is also undergoing a significant restoration now in support of the PV blue and reintroduction of that very plant.
Which one?
So what do you notice about this plant? It's a vine, right? It's a big vine. And it's got a number of names. It's called manroot because the root for this plant, and I don't even know where the original, I don't know where it hits the ground here. If anybody can see that, please yell out. But it is a plant that has a root that's as big as one of us. It's this gigantic, man-sized taproot that goes straight into the ground. And through most of the year, it's just dormant. You'd never know it was here. But in the spring, and when the winter rains start, it starts to send out these tendrils and beautiful white flowers. When the flowers are done blooming and the fruit emerges, this giant thing is what results. It's called wild cucumber, manroot, wild chillicothe. And inside this fruit, once it dries, it's going to dry to be a big brown husk. And if you slice it open, you know what a loofah looks like with the little chambers? It looks just like that. It's really fibrous in there. And there are a number of brown seeds. And those seeds were used by the Indians who, the Indian people lived here probably for 8,000 years, before now. This was all of the plants that we've seen today, many of them were used by them, except for the ones like the mustard, which were brought, introduced by, allegedly by the missionaries to mark their way, but nobody's really sure about the origin of mustard that way. But it's not edible, but those little seeds of this plant were used for playing games like dice. And as toys, as decoration, you could make a necklace out of them, etc. So it's kind of a cool plant, and I mean, it is a very impressive vine that will, once it's done blooming and the fruits have formed, it will completely, you won't see it at all. You won't even notice it so much later than, say, June. Another plant that's really interesting and one that's worth pointing out is the plant that's to the left of this with the white spikes of flowers. The folks in the back of our group today, you can see those flowers right in front. That's a Catalina cherry. Beautiful. The last section of our hike today is dedicated to the reintroduction of California grassland species. And as you can see, a lot of the ones that we've seen already, the goldfields, which are the little tiny daisy-like flowers close to the ground, the owl clover, which we haven't seen yet. We haven't talked about that. It's the kind of, this plant right here, I don't want to step on too much. It's kind of almost a purpley fuchsia with little white flowers. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Careful. That is another plant that's often found in grasslands. It's a relative of Indian paintbrush, if you've seen that, around the peninsula. So this concludes our hike today. I want to thank every one of you for coming on this journey through this beautiful wildflower meadow, and to thank all of the people within our community organizations, corporate sponsors, and everyone who's helped make the PV Land Conservancy's work at the Chandler Preserve possible. Thanks so much, and let me know if you have any questions.